Three helicopters were circling above my parents' backyard while my family stood there speechless. 40 minutes earlier, those same people had laughed when I showed up for Thanksgiving on a city bus. My sister called my aviation company imaginary. My father said I'd wasted 9 years chasing a childish fantasy. To them, I was the family failure, the woman who never bought a car, never bought a house, and never seemed to get her life together. What none of them knew was that the company behind those helicopters belonged to me. My name is Aurelia Voss, and this is the revenge they accidentally created themselves. Chapter 1. The bus doors folded shut behind me, and a blast of cold November air followed as the driver pulled away from the curb. I stood alone on the sidewalk with a single suitcase beside me. Thanksgiving had always transformed this neighborhood into something out of a greeting card. The smell of roasted turkey drifted from open kitchens. Children ran across lawns covered in orange and gold leaves. Families carried trays of food through front doors while laughter floated across quiet streets. For a moment, I simply watched them. A father helped his young daughter hang a wreath. An elderly couple arranged folding chairs in their driveway. Everywhere I looked, people seemed excited to spend the holiday with the people who mattered most. Then I started walking toward my parents' house. The bus stop sat almost half a mile away. It always had. That fact alone would probably become tonight's first conversation. Or criticism. After enough family gatherings, I had learned the difference. The questions never changed. When are you buying a car? When are you buying a house? When are you finally going to settle down? No one ever asked whether I enjoyed my work. No one ever asked how my company was doing. No one ever asked whether I was happy. To my family, success had always been easy to identify. It had 4 wheels, a mortgage, and a visible price tag. Anything else didn't count. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind and continued down Maple Ridge Drive. My parents had lived here for nearly 3 decades. Every corner held a memory. Most of them involved my older sister. Emma Voss had always been the star of the family. She was 3 years older than me and somehow managed to do everything right, at least according to everyone else. She owned a luxury SUV, a sleek executive sedan, and a downtown condominium that my mother mentioned so often I could practically recite its square footage from memory. Whenever relatives visited, Emma's accomplishments became the main topic of conversation. Her promotions, her investments, her newest purchases. My father especially loved comparing us. Emma was practical. Emma was responsible. Emma understood how the world worked. I was the dreamer, the experiment, the daughter who never seemed interested in doing things the normal way. I smiled to myself. If they only knew. A plane passed overhead, barely visible through the gray clouds. My eyes followed it automatically. Some habits never disappear. I had been obsessed with aviation since childhood. While other kids collected baseball cards, I collected airport maps. I spent weekends near airport fences watching aircraft take off and land. I memorized tail numbers. I filled notebooks with sketches of helicopters. The first time I watched a medical rescue helicopter land, I became fascinated. For weeks, I talked about nothing else. My teachers found it amusing. My parents assumed it was a phase. Emma called it weird. As I grew older, people became less patient with my fascination. Dreams are considered cute when you're 10 years old. They become a problem when you're 23 and still talking about them. That thought brought back memories of 2016, the year everything changed. My grandmother, Margaret Chen, passed away that spring. Hurting her hurt more than I expected. She had been the only person in my family who listened without judgment. When I talked about aircraft, she listened. When I talked about building a business, she listened. When everyone else rolled their eyes, she asked questions. A few weeks after the funeral, I learned she had left me $200,000. Suddenly, everyone had advice. My father suggested a house. My mother suggested conservative investments. Emma sent me links to luxury vehicles. Every recommendation sounded sensible. Every recommendation felt wrong. I already knew what I wanted. I wanted to lease a helicopter and launch the aviation charter company I had spent years researching. The conversation that followed was unforgettable. My father stared at me as if I had lost my mind. He said I was risking my future. Emma laughed openly. She asked who would trust a 23-year-old woman with an aviation company. Marcus Hale shook his head and called the idea reckless. Not one person believed it could work. Not one person thought customers would come. Not one person thought I understood what I was doing. I remember leaving that dinner feeling completely alone, but I also remember feeling certain enough to try anyway. The first year was brutal. The second wasn't much easier. There were months when every bill felt larger than my bank account, months when I questioned everything. Yet somehow the business survived. Then it grew. Then it expanded. Eventually, it became something far beyond what anyone had imagined, including me. The strange thing was that I stopped trying to explain it to my family years ago. Every Thanksgiving followed the same pattern. They judged, I listened, nothing changed. Until now. This year felt different, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted approval, but because reality was finally about to catch up with every assumption they had made about me. I checked the time on my phone. Still early, exactly as planned. A notification appeared briefly on the screen. I glanced at it and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Business could wait a little longer. Family drama probably could not. At the end of the street, my parents' house came into view. White siding, blue shutters, the same porch swing hanging near the front door. For a moment, I stood there and looked at it. Then I rolled my suitcase up the walkway. Before I reached the porch, the front door opened. My mother stepped outside wearing an apron dusted with flour. Her eyes moved immediately past me, searching the street, looking for a vehicle, finding nothing. No car, no driveway arrival, no visible sign of success. Exactly what she expected. She folded her arms and looked back at me. Did the bus get here on time? Chapter 2. I stepped inside and set my suitcase beside the staircase while my mother disappeared back toward the kitchen. The answer to her question didn't matter. The fact that I had arrived by bus did. It always did. The house looked exactly the same as it had the year before. The same family photographs lined the hallway. The same antique clock ticked from the living room wall. The same scent of turkey and cinnamon filled every corner. Some things never changed. Unfortunately, neither did my family. Emma was already seated at the dining table when I walked into the room. Her phone rested in one hand while the other waved dramatically through the air. I'm telling you, the dealership manager practically begged me to reserve it before somebody else bought it. She turned her screen toward my father. Look at that interior. Paul Voss adjusted his glasses. That's beautiful. Custom leather? Exactly. Worth every dollar. Emma smiled proudly. I knew you'd appreciate it. Then she noticed me standing there. Well, look who finally made it. I pulled out a chair. Good to see you too. Her eyes drifted toward the front window. Still taking public transportation? I sat down calmly. Still breathing oxygen too. A few people laughed. Emma wasn't one of them. Very funny. Moments later, my mother carried another tray from the kitchen. Linda Voss had mastered the art of sounding concerned while delivering criticism. She placed the dish on the table and smiled gently. Honey, we're just worried about you. I knew what was coming. You always say that. Because it's true. She sat beside my father. You're 32 now. You should be thinking about long-term security. I reached for a glass of water. I am. She sighed. Then why are you still living the way you did 10 years ago? Before I could answer, Emma jumped back into the conversation. Exactly. At some point, you have to stop chasing dreams and start building a real life. I looked at her. A real life according to who? According to adults. The room became quiet. Emma continued. Most successful people own a vehicle. Most successful people don't show up to Thanksgiving carrying luggage from a bus city. Dad nodded immediately. She's not wrong. There it was, the annual performance review. Only this one came without paperwork. The front door opened. More relatives arrived. Marcus Hale entered carrying 2 pumpkin pies. Jennifer followed behind him holding wine bottles. A few seconds later, Frank and Patricia stepped through the doorway. Within minutes, every chair around the dining table was occupied. Marcus looked toward the driveway. "Hey, Aurelia, where'd you park?" I smiled. "About 4 miles away." The table erupted. Marcus slapped the table. "That might be the most honest answer you've ever given." Jennifer laughed softly. "At least buses are environmentally responsible." Jennifer always managed to sound sympathetic while making things worse. Dinner officially began. Turkey was carved, plates were passed, wine glasses filled. For a brief moment, conversation stayed harmless. Then Emma started discussing her newest purchase, the SUV. She spent nearly 10 minutes describing every feature: the sound system, the heated seats, the navigation package, the insurance policy, even the monthly payment. Nobody seemed bored. Dad looked fascinated. Mom looked impressed. Marcus looked jealous. I looked at my mashed potatoes. Then Emma turned toward me. "So, how's your company?" The way she asked made it obvious she already knew the answer she expected. "It's doing well." "That's all?" "It's enough." She laughed. "Every year it's doing well. Nobody ever sees proof." Frank leans forward. "What exactly does the company do now?" "Aviation services." He nodded politely. "That sounds expensive." "It can be." Patricia joined in. "Do you actually make money doing that?" "Some." "Some?" Marcus almost choked laughing. "That doesn't sound encouraging." I stayed calm. Years ago, I would have defended myself. Now I simply listened. The truth didn't require permission. My thoughts drifted backward. I remembered landing my first customer, a small charter contract, nothing spectacular, but to me it felt enormous. I had called my parents immediately. Dad answered. I explained everything: the customer, the revenue, the possibilities. When I finished, he asked whether I had applied for any management jobs recently. That was the entire conversation. Months later, I signed my first major contract. Nobody asks about it. When I hired additional pilots, nobody noticed. When the fleet expanded beyond a single aircraft, nobody cared. Every achievement disappeared into silence. The only thing my family consistently remembered was that I didn't own a car. My phone vibrated against my leg. I glanced down. Rachel Kim. A short message. "Routing issue resolved. Need approval on international adjustment." I reviewed the update, made a decision, sent my response. 30 seconds, maybe less. Emma watched closely. "Business emergency?" "Not really." "Then why do you always look so serious when you check your phone?" Marcus grinned. "Maybe she's negotiating with the Pentagon." Laughter circled the table again. Jennifer shook her head. "Leave her alone." Then she looked at me. "Although I do wonder sometimes what exactly you spend all day doing." There was no malice in her voice, just curiosity mixed with doubt, the same combination I'd encountered for years. Mom reached across the table. "Sweetheart, nobody wants to criticize you. We just want stability for you. Health insurance, retirement savings, something dependable." Dad nodded. "Aviation isn't exactly predictable. Most businesses fail, you know that." I did know, better than anyone. I knew what it felt like to wonder whether payroll would clear. I knew what it felt like to lose sleep over fuel costs. I knew what it felt like to risk everything on a decision. But I also knew what happens when persistence outlasted fear. Unfortunately, nobody at this table cared about that story, because they never asked. Emma leans back in her chair. "Let's be honest. If this company is really doing so well, why are you still riding buses?" Several relatives smiled. Nobody answered for me. Nobody ever did. I looked around the table, at the familiar faces, at the assumptions they carried, at the judgments disguised as concern. Then Emma delivered the final shot. She shook her head and laughed. Are you seriously still trying to convince people that this imaginary company exists? The entire table burst into laughter. I didn't react. I simply looked at the clock on the wall and quietly checked the time. Chapter 3. The screen showed exactly what I expected. 40 minutes. Right on schedule. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Around the table, the laughter gradually faded. Emma was still smiling, clearly pleased with herself. My father reached for another serving of turkey. Marcus poured more wine. The conversation should have moved on. Instead, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call. The name on the screen read, Captain Alejandro Rodriguez. I answered immediately. Rodriguez? His voice remained calm and professional. Good evening, ma'am. Formation is airborne. Current arrival estimate is 40 minutes. Copy that. We've received updated weather reports. No issues expected. Understood. We'll proceed as planned. Thank you, Captain. The call ended. Silence settled over the table. Not complete silence, the kind that appears when everyone pretends they weren't listening. Marcus finally spoke first. Formation? I took a sip of water. Work. Emma laughed. Of course it is. Nobody looked convinced. Even Jennifer appeared curious now. What kind of work uses words like formation? I shrugged. The aviation kind. That only made Emma smile wider. Sure. Dinner continued, at least physically. Mentally, everyone was paying attention to me now. For years, they had ignored anything connected to my career. Tonight was different. Not because they respected it, because they suspected I was lying. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, Rachel Kim, Vice President of Operations. I answered. Rachel, we've completed the Singapore review. Any concerns? One routing adjustment. Everything else is approved. Send me the revision. You'll have it in 30 seconds. Perfect. The call ended. Marcus leaned back. Singapore? I nodded. Yes. Emma rolled her eyes. You know what I think? I didn't answer. I think you've spent so many years pretending this company exists that you've started believing it yourself. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Emma? What? Somebody has to say it. Paul cleared his throat. Your sister is only concerned about you. Concern. That word again. Funny how concern always sounded exactly like criticism. Another vibration. A document arrived from Rachel. I reviewed it quickly. 1 route modification, 1 fuel adjustment, 1 scheduling correction. Approved, sent. Less than 20 seconds. Marcus watched carefully. That looked important. It was. He laughed. No, seriously. So am I. That earned a few surprised looks, not because the statement was rude, because I rarely pushed back. Usually I just listened. Tonight, I wasn't interested in defending myself, but I wasn't interested in pretending either. The clock on the wall moved forward, 33 minutes. I noticed. Nobody else did. The conversation drifted toward real estate again. Emma happily returned to familiar territory. My condo association just approved the renovation proposal. Mom smiled. That's wonderful. It's going to increase property value immediately. Dad nodded approvingly. Smart decision. Then he looked at me. When was the last time you made a smart financial decision? The question landed harder than he intended. At least I hoped it did. I smiled politely. Depends who you ask. Emma laughed immediately. Definitely not your accountant. More laughter. Across the table, Jennifer studied me carefully. Unlike everyone else, she seemed genuinely curious. Can I ask something? Sure. What does your company actually do? The room quieted again. A real question. Rare. I answered honestly. We provide aviation logistics, emergency transportation, charter operations, fleet management, and medical transport support. Nobody spoke for a moment. Jennifer blinked. That's actually pretty specific. Emma recovered first. It's also completely made up. It isn't. She smirked. Prove it. I continued eating. She wasn't looking for information. She wanted a performance. I wasn't interested in giving her one. Another 10 minutes passed. The countdown continued. 28 minutes. Then 24. My phone rang twice more. One call from Fleet Command, one from the Operations Center. Each lasted less than a minute. Each sounded professional. Each made my family increasingly suspicious. Marcus finally pulled out his own phone. What was the company called again? I looked at him. Transglobal Aviation. He typed. A few seconds passed, then his expression changed. Interesting. Jennifer leaned closer. What? Marcus rotated the screen. It's real. Emma immediately laughed. Obviously it's real. No, seriously. He scrolled further. This thing is huge. That got everyone's attention. Paul adjusted his glasses. What are you talking about? Marcus read directly from the screen. Operations across multiple countries. Jennifer grabbed her phone. Wait. She started searching too. A few moments later, her eyes widened. Oh, wow. What? She looked at Emma. According to this, they have over 2,000 employees. Marcus continued scrolling. Hundreds of aircraft. Jennifer read another section. Billions in annual revenue. The room grew quieter with every sentence. For the first time all evening, nobody was laughing. Then Emma rescued the narrative. She shook her head confidently. This proves nothing. Marcus looked up. What do you mean? It means a company exists. She pointed toward me. It doesn't mean she owns it. Nobody answered immediately, because she had a point. The company website contained no public founder information, no executive photos, no interviews, no flashy publicity. Exactly as intended. Jennifer kept reading. I can't find a CEO profile. See, Emma said. There you go. Dad nodded slowly. So maybe she's employed there. I almost smiled. That theory sounded far more believable to them. Aurelia the employee, Aurelia the assistant, Aurelia the office worker, anything except Aurelia the founder. The countdown continued. 18 minutes. My phone rang once more. Captain Rodriguez. I answered. Status? We're exactly on schedule, ma'am. Excellent. We'll be entering the final approach corridor shortly. Understood. The call ended. Paul folded his arms. Enough. The room became still. His voice carried authority it always had. If this company is really yours, prove it. Emma immediately agreed. Exactly. Jennifer looked between us. Marcus lowered his phone. Everyone waited. For years, I had imagined this moment. Not the anger, not the confrontation, the simple reality of finally being asked. I placed my fork down, looked around the table, then checked the clock. 15 minutes. Perfect. I met Emma's eyes first, then my father's, then everyone else's. In 15 minutes, 3 helicopters will land in the backyard. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For one full second, the room froze. Then the entire table exploded with laughter. Emma laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Marcus doubled over in his chair. Even Dad shook his head. Jennifer stared at me as if she genuinely couldn't decide whether I was joking. And in that moment, every person in the room became absolutely certain that I had finally lost my mind. Chapter 4. Nobody bothered hiding their amusement. Emma leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. I can't believe you actually said that. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes. 3 helicopters? Jennifer laughed nervously. Maybe she means toy helicopters. Even my father smiled, not because he found it funny, because he genuinely believed he had finally figured me out. For years, they had tried to understand why I never behaved the way they expected. Now they had an answer. I was delusional. The strange thing was that I felt calmer than I had all evening. I wasn't angry. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't even impatient. I simply knew something they didn't. The next 15 minutes passed slowly, at least for them. For me, every second felt deliberate. Every tick of the clock carried weight. Emma returned to her wine. Marcus resumed scrolling through his phone. Jennifer occasionally glanced at me as if trying to determine whether I was joking. Paul crossed his arms. Linda looked increasingly uncomfortable. She had spent years worrying about me. Tonight, those worries seemed larger than ever. Finally, my father pushed back his chair. Enough of this. Everyone looked toward him. We've humored this conversation long enough. He pointed toward the backyard. There are not going to be helicopters landing behind my house. I know that sounds unlikely. Unlikely? Emma laughed. It's insane. I nodded. Fair enough. That answer only frustrated her more. She wanted an argument. I wasn't giving her one. Another few minutes passed. Then my phone vibrated. Captain Rodriguez. I answered immediately. We're entering the final approach corridor, ma'am. Any issues? None. The ground safety inspection was completed exactly as planned. I glanced through the kitchen window toward the backyard. Weather conditions. Clear. Ground safety. Verified. The temporary clearance remains active. Excellent. We'll see you shortly. The call ended. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Temporary clearance? I smiled. Work-related. Emma groaned dramatically. Everything is work-related. Paul stood up. I'm getting some air. The rest of the family followed. Curiosity was stronger than skepticism. Within moments, everyone had moved outside. The November air felt colder now. Darkness had settled across the neighborhood. Porch lights glowed along nearby streets. The backyard stretched behind the house, bordered by open land and a large undeveloped field beyond the property line. Marcus shoved his hands into his pockets. So where exactly are these helicopters supposed to land? I pointed toward the field. Over there. Jennifer had already pulled out her phone. You don't mind if I record this? Not at all. Emma laughed again. This is going to be amazing. For who? For all of us. She grinned. 10 years from now, we're still going to talk about the Thanksgiving Aurelia completely lost her mind. A few relatives laughed. I didn't. I checked the time. 8 minutes, then 7, then 6. The conversations gradually became quieter, not because anyone believed me, because waiting itself had become interesting. People wanted to see how this would end. Marcus continued searching online. Suddenly, he frowned. Hold on. Nobody responded. He stared harder at his screen. Jennifer moved closer. What? Marcus looked confused. This company is bigger than I thought. Emma groaned dramatically. We already established that. No, listen. He scrolled. They operate in 14 countries. Jennifer looked over his shoulder. Oh my God. What now? Emma asked. Marcus kept reading. 327 aircraft. Jennifer blinked. 2,000 employees? Marcus nodded. Actually more. Paul looked interested despite himself. What kind of company has that many aircraft? Apparently this one. Emma immediately shook her head. That still doesn't prove anything. It proves it's real. It proves a company exists. She pointed directly at me. It doesn't prove she owns it. Nobody argued because she was technically correct. Jennifer searched further. I can't find a founder profile. Marcus checked again. Neither can I. There you go, Emma said triumphantly. If she actually owned it, her picture would be everywhere. I almost smiled. The exact opposite was true. The less visible I became, the easier it was to work. The less attention leadership attracted, the more attention stayed on operations. That philosophy had served me well for nearly a decade. The wind picked up. Leaves rolled across the grass. Silence settled once again. Then somebody heard it. At first, it sounded distant, barely noticeable, a low vibration hidden beneath the wind. Marcus stopped speaking. Jennifer lowered her phone. Paul turned toward the horizon. Do you hear that? Nobody answered, because now everyone heard it. The sound grew stronger, steady, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Emma frowned. What is that? The vibration deepened. The air itself seemed to change. Jennifer's eyes widened. No way! Marcus stepped forward. The noise continued growing, closer, louder. Then 3 lights appeared beyond the trees, tiny at first, moving together, approaching rapidly. Nobody spoke. The lights became shapes. The shapes became aircraft. 3 helicopters, flying in perfect formation. The entire backyard froze. Jennifer forgot to record. Marcus forgot to breathe. Paul stared upward. Emma looked genuinely terrified. The helicopters descended with extraordinary precision. Rotor wash swept across the field. Leaves exploded into the air. The noise became overwhelming. 1 aircraft touched down, then the second, then the third. Perfect, controlled, intentional. Every movement executed exactly as planned. The engines gradually powered down. Silence returned. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed capable of moving. The door of the lead helicopter opened. A tall man stepped onto the grass, wearing a flight suit. Captain Alejandro Rodriguez. He walked directly toward me, not toward my father, not toward Emma, toward me. Every member of my family watched. Every step seemed to erase 9 years of assumptions. Rodriguez stopped a few feet away. Then he stood straight and offered a professional nod. Good evening, ma'am. The backyard remained completely silent. We delivered the fleet exactly as requested. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody said a word. For the first time all night, every person standing there was finally listening. Chapter 5. The silence lasted longer than I expected, not seconds, long enough for people to begin questioning their own memories, long enough for years of assumptions to collapse under the weight of reality. Captain Rodriguez stood calmly beside me while the rotors slowed behind him. Nobody laughed. Nobody made another joke about buses. Nobody mentioned cars. For the first time in 9 years, nobody seemed interested in comparing me to Emma. Marcus finally looked down at his phone again. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen. Then he stopped. His face lost all color. Oh my God. Jennifer immediately stepped closer. What? He turned the screen toward her. Jennifer stared, then looked at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. The expression on her face said everything. She had finally found the answer. Not a piece of it, all of it. Emma folded her arms. What now? Marcus swallowed. She's telling the truth. Nobody responded. He continued. She founded the company. Emma shook her head. No. Marcus turned the phone toward her. Yes. She read silently. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she looked at Captain Rodriguez, then at me, then back at the screen. The confidence she had carried all evening disappeared. My father remained completely still. I had never seen him speechless before, not once. Not when businesses failed, not when relatives argued, not even when my grandmother died. Tonight was different. Captain Rodriguez broke the silence. "Ma'am, would you like me to bring the leadership packet?" I nodded. "Please." One of the pilots walked back to the helicopter and returned with a leather portfolio. Rodriguez handed it to me. I opened it. Inside were operational reports, fleet summaries, international expansion updates, documents bearing my signature. Real, tangible, impossible to dismiss. My father stared at the pages. "You built all this?" "I did." "By yourself?" "Not by myself, with a lot of great people." His eyes moved across the reports. 14 countries. I nodded. "Yes." He turned another page. 327 aircraft? "That's right." Another page. 3,200 employees. "Yes." His voice became quieter. "And you started this with your grandmother's inheritance?" I looked at him. $200,000 and one leased helicopter. Nobody spoke. The truth had finally become visible enough for them. And that was all it had ever taken. Visibility. Not effort, not sacrifice, not years of work, just proof they could touch. Emma looked away. For most of our lives, she had occupied the position of family success story. Tonight, that identity seemed fragile, almost unfamiliar. "What didn't you tell us?" she asked. The question surprised me, not because she asked it, because she genuinely wanted the answer. "I tried." She frowned. "What?" "Yes, I did." I laughed softly. "When I landed my first contract, nobody listened." Silence. "When I expanded operations, nobody asked." More silence. "When the company grew, everyone changed the subject." I looked around at my family. I stopped talking because nobody cared. Nobody argued, because they remembered. Deep down, they remembered. The conversations, the interruptions, the dismissive smiles, the jokes. Then Jennifer asked the question that changed everything. "If all of this is true," she hesitated, "what else don't we know?" I took a slow breath. There it was, the final piece, the one truth that mattered more than helicopters, more than aircraft, more than company valuations. I looked toward the house. The white siding reflected the porch light. The familiar windows glowed softly against the darkness. My father followed my gaze. "What?" I closed the portfolio. "This house." His expression changed. "What about it?" I looked directly at him. "I own it." Nobody reacted immediately. The statement seemed too large to process. Emma laughed once, a nervous laugh, then stopped. "You can't be serious." "I am." My father stared at me. "No." "Yes." "What are you talking about?" I could see confusion turning into fear, so I finally told them. 3 years earlier, the mortgage had entered serious trouble. Payments had fallen behind. The bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. The notices were real. The deadlines were real. The risk was real. My parents never knew how close they came to losing everything, because I learned about it first, through one of the financial firms working with our real estate division. I purchased the property through a holding company. The debt was settled. The foreclosure process ended. Then I structured a lease agreement that allowed my parents to remain exactly where they were. Nothing changed for them, at least not visibly. My mother covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. My father looked devastated. "You did that?" I nodded. "Why?" The answer came easily. "Because you're my family." Linda began crying. Not dramatically, quietly, the way people cry when a truth reaches somewhere deep. My father sat down heavily in a patio chair. The strongest man I'd known my entire life suddenly looked old, not weak, just tired. I thought you were struggling. I know. I thought you needed help. I know. His eyes filled with regret. For the first time all evening, nobody cared about money. Nobody cared about aircraft. Nobody cared about titles. They cared about what they had missed. Years of misunderstanding, years of assumptions, years of believing they knew me when they never truly listened. Emma wiped her eyes. For most of our lives, she had occupied the position of family success story. Tonight, that identity seemed fragile, almost unfamiliar. "What didn't you tell us?" she asked. The question surprised me, not because she asked it, because she genuinely wanted the answer. "I tried." She frowned. "What?" "Yes, I did." I laughed softly. When I landed my first contract, nobody listened. Silence. When I expanded operations, nobody asked. More silence. When the company grew, everyone changed the subject. I looked around at my family. I stopped talking because nobody cared. Nobody argued, because they remembered. Deep down, they remembered. The conversations, the interruptions, the dismissive smiles, the jokes. Then Jennifer asked the question that changed everything. If all of this is true, she hesitated. What else don't we know? I took a slow breath. There it was, the final piece, the one truth that mattered more than helicopters, more than aircraft, more than company valuations. I looked toward the house. The white siding reflected the porch light. The familiar windows glowed softly against the darkness. My father followed my gaze. What? I closed the portfolio. This house. His expression changed. What about it? I looked directly at him. I own it. Nobody reacted immediately. The statement seemed too large to process. Emma laughed once, a nervous laugh, then stopped. You can't be serious. I am. My father stared at me. No. Yes. What are you talking about? I could see confusion turning into fear, so I finally told them. 3 years earlier, the mortgage had entered serious trouble. Payments had fallen behind. The bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. The notices were real. The deadlines were real. The risk was real. My parents never knew how close they came to losing everything, because I learned about it first, through one of the financial firms working with our real estate division. I purchased the property through a holding company. The debt was settled. The foreclosure process ended. Then I structured a lease agreement that allowed my parents to remain exactly where they were. Nothing changed for them, at least not visibly. My mother covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. My father looked devastated. You did that? I nodded. Why? The answer came easily. Because you're my family. Linda began crying, not dramatically, quietly, the way people cry when a truth reaches somewhere deep. My father sat down heavily in a patio chair. The strongest man I'd known my entire life suddenly looked old, not weak, just tired. I thought you were struggling. I know. I thought you needed help. I know. His eyes filled with regret. For the first time all evening, nobody cared about money. Nobody cared about aircraft. Nobody cared about titles. They cared about what they had missed. Years of misunderstanding, years of assumptions, years of believing they knew me when they never truly listened. Emma wiped her eyes. For most of our lives, she had occupied the position of family success story. Tonight, that identity seemed fragile, almost unfamiliar. What didn't you tell us? She asked. The question surprised me, not because she asked it, because she genuinely wanted the answer. I tried. She frowned. What? Yes, I did. I laughed softly. When I